Hello. Hi, everyone. Today we will continue to go through the CKAD question bank, and now let's look at question 3. This question is about updating and exposing ports for a service using a switch. Actually, it's 2 parts. The requirements for this question are basically stated in the prompt. Now, the main detailed requirements for this question are as follows. First, we need to modify some information in our deployment. There are mainly 2 points to change here. The first is from 1, increase the number of pods to 3. By default, it's usually set to 1, so we need to increase it to 3 pods. The second point is to add a label. Adding a label to our pod, these are the 2 steps. This is the first requirement. The second requirement is to expose the port, because now our deployment has already been created. By default, the port is, for this service, right, the port is currently set to 80. We need to switch it to port 81, so we have to change it from port 80 to port 81. So here, basically, well, to be precise, it's not really switching. To be accurate, it's actually just exposing the port. So what we're doing is exposing our port 80 to the outside of our cluster, exposing it outside the cluster. This way, our port, or rather our service, can then be accessed, can be reached. So let's take a closer look at how to solve this problem. Actually, the solution is divided into 2 parts. The first part is that we need to modify some information, specifically 2 things. The second part is to expose our port 81 so that we can, within this cluster, by exposing our port, we can properly access a specific service. All right, that's the requirement for this problem. Now, let's look at the specific solution. The first requirement is to switch nodes, or in other words, to increase the number of nodes from 1 to 3. All right, so first, let's look at the first part. The first part, let's start with that. Okay, here we switch to our command line interface. First of all, of course, the first step is still to connect remotely. Always remember to connect remotely first. After connecting to the corresponding node, the second step is to start modifying our file, modify our file. Now, in this case, since our deployment has already been created, actually, to be precise, because it's already set up, so actually the fastest way to modify it isn't really to edit the file, right? If you're familiar with it, there are mainly 2 ways to make changes. One is to modify our YAML file, right? Let it regenerate, that's one method. The second method is, if a deployment has already been created and is currently running, then at this point, we actually don't need to modify the file and restart it. What do we need to do? We just need to edit it directly. Edit what exactly? Edit our, here, let's first write the name of our namespace, which is 17. Ours is 17. Now let's edit our deployment. As for the name, just use the one given in the question, which is CKAD. You can just use that as the name. This is relatively simple. Then when we press enter here, it actually looks pretty much like a regular file. But in fact, this isn't a file. Pay attention to the lower left corner here. Look at the lower left corner. There's a TMP directory here, right? That's a temporary file. Inside this temporary file, there's this YAML file. So what does this mean? It means that right now, we're actually working inside a temporary file. After we finish making changes, the cluster will re-identify the updated content. Then, if there is any information that can't be changed, what will happen? It will automatically complete the update. So the first requirement is that we need to change the number, right? The first requirement is to run 3 replicas. Right now, there's only 1, right? So here, we change this to 3. All right, that's the first part. The second step is to add a label. The task asks us to add a label inside the pod. So where's the pod? Let's look further down. Find the template section under our SPC. This template is basically a template for our pod. And in this template, what can we add? Right, we can add the required label here. As for the name of the label, according to the requirements, our label section specifies that it's DMZ'd after the colon. So just add this segment into our content. After finding the template, what should everyone pay attention to? Be sure to watch the indentation. Make sure the indentation is correct. Yes, be sure to pay attention to the indentation. Template, then metadata. Labels. At this particular spot, right here in this location, we add its label to the diagram. Or we can just modify the information of our label. Let's go ahead and add it now. Here. The topic article requirement that we need to pay attention to is tier :BDMZ. Okay, that's it for this step. This is one of our articles, just as an example. This is the first part. Just change these 2 places, and after making the changes, what do we need to do? We need to save it. After making the changes, we need to save it. Once it's saved, it actually takes effect immediately. Here, it's basically like we're directly modifying its configuration. After configuring it, once it's set up, we don't need to restart because we're not modifying a file. Please note this. Normally, when we write files, we don't write them in such detail. There is a lot of information inside that, in fact, is normally, after we create this, only then will we have this information. At this point, we can just save and exit as usual. As you can see here, it automatically completes the editing, and correspondingly, there is also an update step. All right, so here you can go and check it out. If you want to take a look, you can check the current quantity. So what quantity are we talking about? Is it the number of puts? It used to be just one, right? Now, as long as there are 3, that means you've succeeded. Let's take a look. 4K. 17 code. Here, we still need to add another option because in the content we just modified. Besides the quantity, we also changed the label. So let's add a command to view the label as well. All right, now we can see, hey, there are 3 here now, right? And if we look further, you can see what else is here. Here we also have the content of the label we just added at the end. All right, that's the end of our first part. The second task is this. Expose the port. Yeah, the second task is to expose the port. So now, what can we do? Here, actually, the question says this, right? The question says that we need to create one in our namespace. The service, yeah, create this. A service, and then so that in our deployment just now, the pod, or more precisely, the pod container, can be exposed or can be accessed through port 81. So it can be accessed via port 81. So here, first of all, we can first confirm the port of the container, which is an essential step. Let's first take a look at the port of the container in the deployment that is already running. First, we need to use a command to check what the container port is now. We use the command kubectl get deployment, and who are we checking? We're checking our deployment. Loop the contents of the current one. As for the container port, how is it usually represented in our file? It's like this. Here we use grep. We use the grep command to filter for the container, the one named container. Port. Our container port is represented by this word. So if we filter here, we can see, hey, port 81, right? Yes, port 81 is right here. Now that we have this port, right? So what can we do here? We can proceed as usual. We can write the configuration for this port, which is now port 81, right? The port is 81, that's confirmed. Then at this point right here, everyone really needs to pay close attention. Please pay attention to one important thing. What is it exactly? If this port, now specifically port 81, is fine and working properly, then there is absolutely no problem at all. Just in case, if in the previous step, the port that was checked and found is 80, then what do you need to do? You also need to change the port in the 2 commands we're about to use to 80 as well. You need to change it to 80. So here, when we're specifying the port, the external port and the container port definitely need to match. If, for example, one is 80 and the other is 81, or to put it another way, it's not just about one being 80 and the other being 81. What I mean is if you set the external port to 80, but the container port is set to 81, then it actually won't connect, right? It just won't connect. Here, what we're doing with the container is essentially port mapping, so you really need to pay attention to the container's internal port. Who is it? 18, 11. In that case, we can just use our this command to expose the port. The command is a bit long, so you'll need to spend a bit more time memorizing it, right? Specifically, the command to expose the port is xbox. After that, add the name of our deployment. In our case, it's the CK deployment. And then the name is specified in the question, right? It's specified as rover. If it's our Swiss port, no, Swiss name. As for the protocol, of course, there's no doubt, it's the TCP protocol. For the port, the one we want to expose is port 81. All right, let's take a look over here. In this section, there's also another port. Finally, the type, tip in this particular case, equals node port. The command is a bit long. This line, the type is under the pod. In this part, first of all, everyone should pay attention. There are several ports here, right? First, the first port, this port is our Swice exposed soft port. And then, what is the target port here? This is the network port inside the container. So if the port you checked above was 80, you must change this to 80. Make sure to change it to 80. Everyone, pay attention. You must set it to 80. And then, after that, Our notepad, that is our type, is the type for this switch. All right, so here it is. You really need to pay attention here. Really pay attention. In this part, everyone must pay special attention to the port, especially the target port. If the container above checks and the input is 80, but you write 81 here, then it definitely won't connect, right? It definitely won't connect. So when the question asks for 81, who is it actually asking for? It's asking for this one. Because this is the port we expose to the outside, right? It's the external exposed port. So in short, it's the service exposing the port, and that's to the outside. The service exposes the port. So here, everyone must pay attention to the port situation. Now, let's take a look at this command. This step is basically about creating a service. It's just that here we don't use the create command. Instead, we're actually exposing the port. All right, now let's take a look. After exposing it, there were no errors, right? That means our syntax is correct. Next, we need to check the result, and the result needs to match. So first, what do we need to check? Let's check within our current namespace. What is it? Service. As we can see from the information here, firstly, the type is port 81, the class IP is 10.106, then the port is 81, and the colon is 30,825. This last part is random, meaning the last part, 30,825, is random each time. The ones I make are all different. What is this? This is because of our type. It's Notepad. What about this port 81 that we've exposed with our service? Well, we can use it directly within the cluster. So what does this mean? It means that this is a port we can use externally, a port that can be accessed from outside. Because actually here, for services, there are mainly two types, right? There are mainly two types, and Notepad is one of them. This type allows us to further expose our port to the outside, to make it accessible externally. So here, first of all, we can just access it. Because what does the question require? The requirement in the question is simply to let us expose port 81 and then use the Notepad type. However, actually, it does not require us to access it through Notepad. So when it comes to checking here, in the end, what do you really need to do? You just need to use our command along with our IP. The IP is 10.106.83.220, right? For this IP, we just need to add a colon, then the port, which is 81, and that's it. Then as long as I can access and see hello world on port 81, there's no problem. All right, that's basically it for this part. As for the third question, the main challenge here is actually the second part of the command is a bit long, but everything else is fine. Everything else is manageable. One more thing is, before running the bridge command, you must check whether the port is 81. Make sure to check the internal container port. It doesn't really matter what port the question asks for, but generally, you should pay attention. Usually it's 81. However, inside your container, it might not necessarily be the case. So you need to check carefully whether the container port is 81, 80, or something else. These are actually variable parameters. What if one day this needs to be changed, right? If you write the wrong port, then once the port is wrong, it's basically no different from not having created it at all. In other words, there won't be any partial credit in this situation. So everyone must pay attention. Because for this question, what is it really asking you to create? Create a switch. If you make a complete mistake with this switch, right? If you don't get it at all, then it basically doesn't mean anything, right? There's no such thing as new shares here. Of course, there is still a part, right? The first part, well, that's about reading, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the second part. As for the first part, if you can succeed in starting a business over there, actually, the first part is relatively simple. We just increase the quantity a bit and add a label. This is relatively straightforward. This actually has nothing to do with the second part. These two are basically unrelated, and the scores for these two are generally average. Try to do as much as you can. Yes, try to get as many right as possible. Don't approach it with the mindset of, what if I get it wrong? What kind of attitude should you have? You should aim for a perfect score. When doing this, that's the only way, right? This is actually the easiest part to pass. If you just approach it with the mindset of barely passing or just scraping by, then actually it's very easy to fail. All right, so for this, everyone really needs to pay attention. Make sure to pay extra attention to this content. Okay, so this is our third question. This command is a bit long, so everyone should take note of it carefully. Also, when checking with this command, make sure to clearly identify what the container port is. Then, when you're here at the target post, write the corresponding container port. All right, that's our third question. If you need the complete question bank, you can leave a comment below and get it at the best price as a reliable question bank. That's all for today, everyone. Bye-bye.